Hi guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Daniel, and just a little bit about myself. I'm based in Singapore and I've been investing in property for the last 7 to 8 years. A majority of my portfolio is in the UK, right? We have properties in London and we also have properties in the north of London. And in fact, I'll share in another video what are some property investing hotspots in the UK to take advantage of the whole Brexit situation. So stay tuned for that. But you know what I wanted to share today in today's video is really, I've probably been asked this question more than hundreds of times over the years by people who know of what I've been doing in investing in property. And these are the top 3 advice that I've shared with them. So hope you enjoy that. The first one really is that we need to begin with the end in mind. What is that goal of investing in property? So that we can be laser focused on what is the eventual property that we buy. You know, we have heard advice from all over the place. People might think about diversification. However, when you're thinking about properties, if you know what you're doing, you don't necessarily want to diversify, because it's not like buying stocks, right? You take $10,000 and then you buy, or even if it's $100,000, you buy different stocks and have a diversified portfolio. Whereas for property, for most people, they might buy, you know, apart from their own home, another 1, 2, 3, or 5 properties, and I think we'll consider having done really well. So what you want instead is having laser sharp focus to make sure that each property you buy fulfills the end in mind, the end goal. And what I mean by that, a lot of people might be thinking, you know, I want to buy a property because it's, you know, in an up and coming area, and with the goal to eventually rent it out. So therein is a bit of a confusion, because there are 3 main strategies for property investing. The first of which is to get rental income, where you get you rent it out. The money that comes in rent is able to cover all the costs of the outgoings of the property. So that's the first, renting it out, getting a kind of like a passive income. The second is capital appreciation. So the idea that you hold on to the property, you know, over the next 10, 20 years, the property goes up in value, and then you sell it off for a profit. And the third reason is really capital preservation. And this is where, you know, the rich come in. You hear people from all over the world, the founders of Google, Jackie Chan, you know, coming into Singapore to buy good class bungalows where land is scarce. So this is, you know, having clarity on which of these 3 strategies is it that you really want to focus on, right? Because if we are, you know, the average person like myself investing in property for capital preservation, obviously that would be the wrong strategy, because we don't have that hundreds of millions to be able to, you know, just apportion aside to buy one good class bungalow. On the other hand, having clarity on whether it is passive income or whether it is capital appreciation is absolutely important. And like most people would say, I want both, all right? And that's great. However, a lot of people consider having both in one property. Unfortunately, capital appreciation and having a good yield, a good passive income, tends to have a bit of an inverse relationship, where in areas where you have very good rental yields, the capital appreciation may not be as high. However, in places where there might be very good capital appreciation, the rental yields might be lower. Let me give you an example. Say, look at the big cities around the world. Singapore, London, you know, big cities in Australia, for example. A lot of people ask me what I think about investing in Australia. It's great, and you know, the prices have gone up over the years. However, if you were to rent out these properties, most people will know that the yields are anywhere between 2, 3, 4% at most, right? Because the cost of these properties are just so high. However, investing in places where, you know, the hotspots in the UK, for example, places like Manchester, where, you know, you can still buy terrace houses for 100, 200,000 pounds. That's like less than half the cost of a HDB flat in Singapore. You can own a house. Yeah, when I first knew about that, it just blew my mind. These places, the rental yields are actually much higher, anywhere between 6 to 8% at a minimum if you buy in the right places. On the other hand, whilst the capital appreciation is not as high, what it then gives me is that certainty, regardless of where the market, you know, the economic condition of the markets are going, the rental income is actually, there's a greater certainty in that, right? Because if there isn't such a big band of fluctuations, both upwards and downwards, it actually is a perfect place for a rental income strategy, but perhaps not so much for a capital appreciation strategy. So that's tip number one, beginning with the end in mind. Making sure if you buy a property, some people think, oh, I want to buy because it's up and coming, the estate agent says it's really good, but actually in their heart, their goal is to rent it out to get some passive income, either to pay for some expenses for the family, or collect income to provide for their parents who are aging and elderly. Right, so that's the first thing. The second thing to take note of is location, location, location. I'm sure many of you have heard of that when it comes to property, isn't it? However, that is precisely the challenge, because property is not about just location, location, location. A lot of people come to me and say, hey Daniel, should I invest in a property in Japan, or should I invest in a property in Australia or New Zealand or Hong Kong or Singapore or Malaysia, in Iskandar, for example, or KL or Penang? I own a property in Penang as well, and I'll share more about that property in particular on another video. Or places like the US, which I've bought properties in the US before, as well as places like the UK. How do I know which location is better? And like me some 7 years ago, they're extremely confused, right? Where do I even start? I don't even know which property is better than the other. So once again, remembering the first tip, beginning with the end in mind. If we know that, for example, our strategy is to rent out to get more passive income, so that it can either replace part of the income of the job that you're in and working really long hours, for example, then the sure thing is that a lot of up and coming areas, be it capital place like Cambodia, Vietnam, even in Singapore or Australia, you're buying it and hoping that the price goes up. Even if the price goes up, it's great, but you're not going to be able to rent it out to get passive income. Yeah? Or even if you rent it out, the rental is not able to cover the outgoing expenses. So that's absolutely important. So it cycles back to the first principle once again. What is the strategy you're going for? If it's not for capital appreciation, right, then think about whether or not it is able to meet positive cash flow. And that really is the third thing to consider, right? Which means at the end of every month, whatever rent you collect, is it able to cover all the outgoing expenses of the property? So let me give you an example. One of my friends, he was really proud that he bought a property in districts 9, 10, and 11. And that is, in the central district in Singapore. For those of you who are watching from overseas, a lot of people, Asian investors, think that buying, smack in the city center tends to be a better investment. All right, that's the hearsay or a general wisdom of the crowd. However, it is very good for perhaps capital preservation or even capital appreciation over the years. However, because properties in these locations tend to be very expensive, and hence the rental yields will be very low, right? So once again, if you're investing for passive income, these locations are not going to work really well. However, he was really happy, and he told me that, every month I can get a rent of about $3,500 for a small unit in central Singapore. So I asked him, so what is your monthly outgoings? How much are you paying in terms of your bank loan every month? And he said $4,000. So I did a quick math. If you're following me right here, there is a net negative $500 of negative cash flow every month. So when I pointed that out to him, he said, well, if I can own a piece of property in central Singapore for $500 additional every month, that seems like a pretty good deal to me. Well, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of amateur investors get stuck into this cycle. They think that, a tenant is paying rent on my property, and all I need to do is fork out another $500 to continue to own the property over the next 20 years. Can you imagine paying $500 a month for the next 20 years? All that we are doing in this instance is to subsidize your tenant, all right, to live in a nice property, right? Because in effect, if the person wants to live in a property, if they bought the property, they would have to pay $4,000 in mortgage every month. But you're subsidizing your tenant $500 to stay in a nice property. So it really blows my mind as to how that math works out. So, and think about it in a different way, all right? If you want to you could afford to do it for one property. What if you buy a second property or a third property? How many properties can you afford to pay 500, 1,000 out of your pocket every month just to service the loans? All right, to me, that is an extremely risky way of investing, because if you think back to Robert Kiyosaki and his definition of what an asset is. All right, simply put, an asset is something that puts money into your pocket rather than takes money out of your pocket. So strictly by his definition, that property that he bought in central Singapore is not an asset. Right? On the other hand, through our strict criteria of selection of our properties, we make sure that every property that we buy, through our stringent criteria, gives us a minimum positive cash flow. All right, it has to be a minimum of at least 300 Singapore dollars a month, after net deducting all other expenses. In most cases, it's at least 500 to 1,000 Singapore dollars of profit every month. So that is really the third thing to share with you, making sure that your property investments that you buy has a positive cash flow, and not to consider a lot of other costs that people don't factor in or think of, such as your management cost, if you have to pay taxes, if all the other costs add up. And oftentimes a lot of properties end up being cash flow neutral, meaning it just covers its cost, or perhaps even cash flow negative. All right, so I hope these 3 tips have been helpful for you to think about, really reevaluate your investment choice if you have not considered these 3 things. So the first one is beginning with the end in mind. Are you trying to buy something in a hope that the price goes up? On the other hand, you're hoping that actually your primary reason is to rent it out for passive income. Do a check on whether that strategy works. The second is location. Location is not everything. All right, make sure that you think about whether these locations or the strategy of renting your property out for passive income works in those locations. And the third is making sure that the property gives you a positive cash flow every month. And then that helps you to, minimize the risk of property investment, and also make sure that every property you buy gets you closer and closer to that, having passive income to finance your lifestyle needs and your lifestyle goals. Okay, so hope you enjoyed this quick 3 tips. Please click subscribe to this channel if you liked what I've shared. Share this with your friends, type your comments or your questions below. I will be happy to answer them. And you can also continue to follow us at www.bornpoordierich.com. Till the next video, see you soon.